Why play Conquerors? Well, if you have a spot for it, Conquerors can be one of the best traits that you can play, as well as one of the most fun ones. If you have a strong early game, it really synergizes well to play Conquerors because you can get lots of cash outs that will basically spike you or set yourself up really well for late game. Or if you just like playing a tempo comp and you like the idea of getting lots of cash outs, then Conqueror might be the trait for you. However, Conquerors does require a very strong early game. I would say Conquerors as sometimes food. It is a bit situational in order to actually convert into a win. There's lots of late game risk as well, and it requires you to convert off some cash outs. So it is a bit scary and difficult sometimes in your late game when you are playing Conquerors. In addition to that, a lot of the important units are also very popular with other boards, namely Mordekaiser and Mbessa, so you might actually run yourself into a problem of not being able to find the units that you really require in order to cap out the board, or even finish your game plan of items holders that you wanted to play. So what are Conquerors? So the Conquerors trait in TFT set 13, basically the way it works is that Conquerors takedowns grant stacks of conquest, and after gaining enough conquest, they then open war chests full of loot. So Conquerors will then gain attack damage and ability power increased by 3% for each war chest open. So the idea is that you basically get these loot chests, they give you some sort of loot, which we'll go over after. And then in addition to that, they'll also gain AP and AD based on the amount of chests that they open. The breakpoints are defined in the game, which we'll also talk about later. Without much further ado though, I would like to say, if you do like my content, make sure to like and subscribe please. I'm going to have a giveaway very soon, and it's going to be open to subscribers. I will give details about that. I did not forget. I'm just going to give details about it once I have time to record the whole steps of how to enter the giveaway little short video. But for this, it's just going to be a guide for today on Conquerors. So, when should you play Conquerors? Now, this is the part that might be a little bit more biased towards like me thinking that the trait needs certain really harsh conditions, but I'll try and explain why in the upcoming little stats dive, as well as showing you some early game boards. But I would never really play Conquerors unless I have a Conqueror emblem. So I either get a spatula, or I get an augment like this where it's Conqueror crest, because it gives you the emblem as well as a rel. Then all you need is a Darius and a Draven, which are both 1-cost units, and you can fit in 4 Conqueror early. What I'm trying to get at is that if I don't see that I can easily fit in 4 Conqueror on stage 2, I'm probably not going to be playing Conqueror, and I'll explain all of that in a little bit. The other way I would play towards Conqueror is if I can take Nox and Guillotine. Nox and Guillotine basically allows you to execute enemies. This is really massive. It allows you to win and scam a lot of early game rounds. It also synergizes really well with the board that you want to play very tempo and aggressively. You want to kill units in order to get those Conqueror stacks, and then get to a certain amount of loot that you can then use to convert yourself into a better position. Additionally, they get stronger every loot crate that you open, so you want to make sure that you absolutely decimate in your early game to set yourself up really well for late game. It's not something you can just like splash in towards the end of the game. So something like Nox and Guillotine synergize with that really well, because the health execute basically guarantees kills every single round. So what are your conditions for success? I was already alluding to this a little bit in the previous slide, but basically you want to have 4 Conqueror on stage 2. At some point in stage 2, you want to have 4 Conquerors. So if you get dropped a Swain, if you get dropped a Rel, if you get dropped an Emblem, something like that, you want to make sure that you have 4 Conqueror during stage 2, or else you'll have a very hard time reaching some of the win con conditions of the cash outs for this augment, for this trait, excuse me. If you're not going to have 4 Conqueror on stage 2, a lot of times you can play Conqueror and then play around Mbessa with another board, something like Vertical Emissary, or something like Enforcers, or something like Quick Strikers. But if you want to play Conqueror, and you want to play like the Conqueror trait, 4 Conqueror is very essential, because you will find that you will fall off very hard late game without certain cash outs. Additionally, if you can tempo with augments and econ, if you're strong and you can use your gold aggressively, that is very important. Additionally, if you can make it to 6 Conqueror ASAP, that's also really good. This is really important because if you have an emblem, it makes it a lot easier. If you don't have an emblem, you need a Mordekaiser. And Mordekaiser, you might go your whole game and not find a Mordekaiser because it's going to be very hard to find on level 8, and you need a lot of gold to make it to level 9, as well as roll for him on level 9. So you have to be very careful about that, and make sure to plan ahead. Expect to be 4 Conqueror for most of the game is what I'm trying to say if you don't have an emblem. And then also, like I was saying before, you have to make it to level 9 a lot of times. This board caps out around playing multiple legendaries, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But anyways, now we're going to look at some stats and some early game options, just to like convince you and show you some of like the research and the homework and stuff. But basically, if you're looking at all your units, the way you should always think about it is that Conquerors is mostly an AD comp, right? Darius, Draven, and Ambessa are all AD units. Rel and Swain are mostly tanks. Swain can also turn into a backline unit because he's a form swapper, so don't sleep on that. He's very, very strong in the backline. But typically, if you're playing backline Swain, a lot of times you're playing more towards like a sorcerer type of line. So just be wary of that. And Mordekaiser is an AP unit. But in general, you're typically trying to build like melee frontline items because you have both the Darius and the Ambessa that are AD melee units that can use those items. So a lot of times you'll put items on Darius and then eventually transfer them onto an Ambessa. So now we're just going to look at some rough stats of Conquerors. So if you look at the stats, typically if you look at something like 2 Conqueror, these are not boards that are strictly related to Conqueror. It does have a really high average, but that's because Ambessa right now is very, very strong. She recently got buffed and she's one of the best forecasts in the game right now. So that's why 2 Conqueror is really good. If you look at the other traits, the other levels of the trait, the stats on it start to look really, really poor, right? A 4.5 is the average, right? A 4.5 basically means that, hey, this comp, you go equal amount of top 4s as you do bot 4s. And you can also look at top 4%, you might be a bit better to understand. You'll see that on average, most people that play 4 Conqueror are going bot 4. The real shocker is 6 Conqueror. This one you see like this very, very weird distribution in terms of the placements, right? You'll see a huge percentage of them go first, right? The most people go first with it, but then most of the other placement is below top 4. You'll see the average for top 4 is below 50%. So most of the time that you play this comp, you are not going to top 4. Just based on like other people play, like the way that it looks with statistics. What this basically means is it's kind of like donkey math. It's not 100% what I'm saying, but what I'm trying to explain is that you want to have a good spot for it. If you look at your spot and you're like, this is a good spot for Conquerors. I have 4 Conqueror early. I have a really good augment. I have upgraded units. I am very strong. Then you're probably going to get a first, right? It's a comp where you really need a good spot for it, and then you just go first. And if you don't have a good spot for it, there's a good chance that you just fizzle out and you might end up bot 4. So you always want to be very, very careful of that. Don't just like declare yourself a Conqueror player at the start of the game. More so look at your units, look at your board, and think to yourself, do I have necessary conditions in order for this to do really, really well? Another example, I'll just show you like Ambessa in general. So as you can see, Ambessa is very, very strong. I just put 2-star Ambessa. The stats on her is that she's like well above 4.5, which means that she's really, really strong. A really high top 4 percentage, but as soon as you start putting vertical Conqueror in, it starts adding to that placement. It starts lowering that placement by a good amount. Ambessa is also very, very contested because she's in many, many strong boards. She's also an emissary unit, which makes her very good as just a splash unit to put on a board. So playing around Conqueror is also risky because of how much people want to play around Ambessa. Mordekaiser is also really strong. So Mordekaiser, other people like Dominator players, Silco players, they're going to hold on to Mordekaiser as well. So it's not like you're playing some niche line. You're playing a line that on average goes bot 4 and the units are very contested. So definitely a sometimes food. Be careful about it. Anyways, typically what a board would look like, I'm talking about a level 8 board. There are reroll versions of Swain and Gangplank. I think that they're somewhat fraudulent. I'm not sure how they are this patch, but last patch at least, I tried them out, and I don't want to give you like bad advice, but there is lines where you can reroll Swain and Gangplank and play 4 Conqueror. I think it's a little bit baked, but like I said, if you have a bunch of Swains, maybe you can try that out. A lot of times Swain backline is really, really strong if you're playing around sorcerers. So that's another opportunity that you can play reroll Swain. If we're talking about Conqueror in its purest form like this, getting to 6 Conqueror is pretty important, so you usually just want to play around the Mordekaiser and the Ambessa. This is without a spatula, by the way. If you have a spatula, a lot of times you put on Gangplank, and then eventually you put it on a 5 cost, which we'll talk about once we get to the cash outs that Conqueror gives you. But your board typically will look something like Ambessa items being Edge of Night, which is really, really strong on Ambessa. Giant Slayer is very, very strong on Ambessa, but it's more of a late game slam, so be careful. It doesn't have much value early game because it has a threshold. In order to activate its active effect, units have to have 1,700 max health, so it's a little bit awkward to use in your early mid game for that reason. But typically, Edge of Night is her best item because she's going to be dashing around, so if she dashes to the opponent's side of the field, and then she just like plants herself in front of the enemy carry, you don't want to just explode and die. Mordekaiser can use tank items. He's very flexible, but a lot of times the best item everybody always wants to put on him is QSS, or Quicksilver Slash. The reason is that having him attack really fast and not getting stunned is really important. He has a lot of Omnivam, and he has this ramping effect where he basically gains extra damage when he's attacking, so it's really nice. We also have Rel, Swain, Darius. You can play around all of them. A lot of times I just like to put Swain as a frontline tank because he's just so hard to kill. And usually, if you have emblems, you can drop some of the weaker one-cost units and play stuff like Twisted Fate to give Quick Striker bonus onto Mbessa, or you play a bunch of 5 costs. A lot of times your early game boards are going to look something like this. If you just have no emblem and you have a really good spot for Conqueror, a lot of times it's because you're starting out with a Swain. A lot of times, even though you don't have the other synergies for the units, it's really good to just have 4 Conqueror in as soon as possible to get the maximum amount of stacks that you can. You grow the stacks much faster if you start out with 4 Conqueror. Rel is a really good tank. She has the ability to like steal some armor, so she's really good early game. And then you also have your Swain and your Darius. A lot of times, like, your board might also look like this, where you're playing around 2 Conqueror. This is just the family opener. You do want to pivot into 4 Conqueror if you're committing to 4 Conqueror early, but this is a board that plays around Draven and Darius really early, and then if you happen to find a Swain and a Rel, you can easily pivot into 4 Conqueror as soon as you find them, but this can help you to get some early stacks with just the 2 Conqueror, which recently got buffed because it's a little bit weak, so that's really nice to have. Additionally, early game boards, this would be an example of a really strong early game. If you have a Conqueror emblem, then you can actually build like a really strong board around those units. Some kind of example is like when you have Swain Gangplank, you get the free form swapper in. This is a board that will basically streak you for most of stage 2 and most of stage 3. You can just play around Rel, get some extra synergies in like Sentinels. Team-wide buffs are really strong because Conqueror gives all your units AP and AD. So if you can get like Bruiser in, if you can get something like Sentinel in, it basically makes all your units have a bunch of AP, AD, and armor, MR, HP, so it just makes everybody really juiced up, which is really strong. Also, what I would like to say is, like, you know, early game items also matter. You want to slam your items as often as possible. Darius can be a holder of melee items, which you can eventually put on Mbessa. And even if you have to make a Gwinsu early on Draven is fine. You could eventually put on some sort of 5 cost late game, but just making sure that you're winning rounds early and killing units early is the most important thing when you're playing around Conquerors. Now, I keep showing this slide, by the way, but I'm just going to show you in general. Something that's really done well this set is the trait trees of the units. I think it's really well done. So Conqueror is a trait where you want to tempo. You want to be stronger than the lobby. You want to push levels aggressively. You want to use your gold aggressively to level, play high cost units, win as many rounds as possible, and you just keep going until the game's eventually over, and then you steamroll the lobby. It's very tempo based. Something that's really cool is that most of the 5 costs that exist in the game have synergies with the units that you are playing. It makes it very flexible that you can fit in a 5 cost if you just find one randomly, and it will find itself really nicely on your team. If you have a Conqueror emblem, you can also juice all of the 5 costs very aggressively with the Conqueror trait. They're all very strong with the Conqueror trait. One, for example, Jace, has scaling for AP for his Hextech Forge, but it also has scaling of AD for his ability. So if you have a trait like Conqueror that keeps giving them AP and AD that scales with opening war chests, an early Jace is going to be absolutely a monster. Additionally, Rumble, LeBlanc, Malzahar, Savika, they all have synergies with the board, so you can find a way to play them very easily. The only ones that don't have synergies are Jinx and Caitlyn, but even then, if you see a Jinx and a Caitlyn and you have an emblem, you can just put it on them and play it. The same with Victor, Mel, and Warwick. If you have an emblem, it can really juice them by giving them a lot of stats, because that's the whole Conqueror trait, is getting a bunch of stats. Now, this is the part that might be spoiler. If you are somebody who's playing TFT mostly for fun, you can avert your eyes for a couple seconds. This is going to be the cash outs that you can get from Conqueror. So these are all the breakpoints and what they are. They are guaranteed. This is what it is, and unless they change it or they change the patch. This is on tactics.tools, so that's what I'm using if you want to open it up for yourself while you're playing. But it's important to know what the cash outs are so you can plan ahead of it. But roughly, you don't have to memorize everything, right? The idea is that the first breakpoint is really important because it gives you 2 gold. This can help you to make early game econ. A lot of times playing 2 Conqueror early is really nice because you get the 2 gold and then you can make like 50 gold or something like that. But a lot of these breakpoints are just stuff to help you tempo, right? You get a 2-star 2-cost unit, which you can use to try and you can either sell it for more gold or you can use it on your board to make your board strong. At 65 conquest, you get a 4-cost unit, which if it's a 4-cost unit that you can play on your board, you can use it to tempo. Breakpoint 4, you get a lesser champ duplicator and a 3-cost unit. You can use this lesser champ duplicator just to, like, you don't have to reroll a Swain or a Gangplank or something like that. You can just use the duplicator for tempo purposes, like just like upgrade a Swain to a Swain 2 to make sure that you keep winning. And then breakpoint 5, you get a component. Breakpoint 6, you get a 4-cost and a 5-cost, and we already talked about all the 5-costs are very, very easy to use with the comp, so always keep this in mind. But this is the main breakpoint, right? This is the one that sets off the alarm bells. If you can make it to breakpoint 7, 330 conquest, that's your ticket to top 4. That's your ticket to top 2, top 1 even. This is the breakpoint where you look at the game and you say, yes, that's me, I'm gonna win. That's the one that you have to know. 330 is what you're planning for. Why? It gives you a 2-star 5-cost. We already went over how most of the 5-costs are very easy to play with this comp. That's the whole point of this comp, right? You want to tempo, you want to be strong, you want to win rounds, you want to keep winning rounds, you get a bunch of AD and AP, and ideally, if you have a Conqueror emblem, which is one of the main conditions you would play this comp in the first place, you can then put it, just slap it on this guy. You get a 2-star 5-cost, slap it on them. Guess what? They just got a shit ton of AP and AD, and it's a really expensive, really powerful unit. That's the main breakpoint that you want. If you can hit 330 conquest, then you're all right. You'll be fine, right? The thing is that it's really hard to hit if you don't have a good spot for it. That's why I say, unless you can get 4 Conqueror in stage 2, the chances are you might not ever hit that. It's very, very hard to reach. If we go back to like my slides, I'll just do like some quick maths for you. Some rough math, right? Let's say we're at we want to get to 330, right? If we want to get to 330, there are approximately 5 rounds per stage. Let's say we want to get to 330 and we want to get to it at around, roughly speaking, beginning of stage 5, right? Beginning of stage 5 would mean that it would be around 15 rounds, right? 5 rounds of player combat is where you can earn your conquest. So if we're trying to figure out how much conquest stacks we want each turn, we can divide it by 15. Now, I know that this isn't perfectly divisible by 15. Roughly speaking, it's approximately 20, right? It's like 20, maybe like 21, whatever, who cares, right? What I'm trying to say is that's approximately this number. Let's just go with 21 because it's an easy number to use. We're just estimating here. You can do the exact number, you're gonna get a bunch of decimals. Approximately 21, right? If you have 4 Conqueror in for most of the game, right, you don't find a Mordekaiser, you don't have a spat, right? What's gonna happen is if you divide 21 by 3, because 3 is the amount of units that you what's it called? 3 is the amount of conquest you get if you're 4 Conqueror per unit kill. If you divide these numbers, you get to around 7. You have to average killing 7 units per round. Now, that's like a bit of a rough, this is a bit of like a doomer situation, but that's what I'm trying to say. If you assume, like, you know, obviously we rounded some numbers. If you do the actual math, it's like you need to kill around 6 units to cash out after carousel on stage 5. Right, it's like 6 per round. Like if you do the actual math without like me writing a bunch of decimals, it's like 6 units per round, and you cash out like stage 5 carousel, right? Which is very late in the game if you're like desperately hoping for a carousel. So that's when you get your 2-star 5-cost, right? I'm going to show you a VOD review now, and you'll see exactly how it worked out in my game, and it's roughly around the same math. That if you want something at the middle of stage 5, you have to have 4 Conqueror in early. If not, you're probably never going to hit 330, and you're never going to get the 2-star 5-cost. So it's a VOD that I haven't posted. If you want to see a really, really high roll game, I actually had it in the top right of the VOD here, and I'm also going to put it in the description below. Basically, that's going to be a 9 Conqueror max cash out where you can see all the cash outs, even the ones beyond 330. And it's one of the most craziest games that I've had in all of TFT. So please go check that out if you want to have like an entertaining video to watch on your wonderful weekend evening. But if we look here, excuse me, this is just a game where I look around, I take worth the wait. I hit worth the wait Darius. So this actually, I had worth the wait Darius and I have a rel early. So I'm kind of thinking to myself, I'm probably going to angle myself towards Conquerors here, just because I can play around this Darius. I'll eventually have a Darius 4 super late in the game, but I feel like I'm decently strong. I put in the Violet for Pit Fighter. This is a bit ago, right? This was back when I was Platinum. I'm like Diamond something now, trying to rank up to Master as soon as I have the time to play a little bit more. Because right now I'm working on some art on stream, so I'm going to work on ranking up next week. But either way, Worth the Wait is really, really strong for tempoing. I find a Gangplank, so basically I'm just waiting for a Swain, and I'm going to pivot to that like Swain board that I was talking about before. But the idea here is that because I'm Worth the Wait synergizes really well to just be really, really tempo based. You get this 3-star 1-cost unit very, very early in the game, so you can win a lot of the fights on stage 2 and stage 3. Additionally, you can convert that into a 4-cost for late game. So by the time I get to like those higher Conqueror stacks, I'll then have a really, really strong Darius for later in the game. So right now I'm just 2 Conqueror. This is what happens a lot of the time if you don't hit a Swain or if you don't have an emblem. It's really hard to just natural into a Swain. It's very high roll. So this isn't the greatest of Conqueror spots, but it's really good because I have the Darius already. So on Carousel here, I take Swain off Carousel instantly. Swain gives me 4 Conqueror, and I have the Draven. Sorry, I have the Draven and I have the Gangplank. So I have a good backline, I have a good front line. Basically in 3 turns, I'm gonna have Darius 3-star. So my mid game on stage 3 is also gonna be very strong. But like I said, because I was 2 Conqueror, you can look at my stacks. The stacks are on the bottom right. I paused the video. It says 14 out of 35. So 35 is that second breakpoint that I'm trying to reach, right? The second breakpoint, remember what it is? It's like a 2-star 2-cost unit. So I haven't gotten a lot of stacks during stage 2. I'm also losing a lot of these fights because Darius himself is a little bit inconsistent. He's not super tanky and he's not super high on the damage. So I am losing a couple fights against some of the high rollers in the lobby. So this isn't the best spot, but it's definitely not the worst spot. It's like a spot where I can play around Conqueror. This would be like the bare minimum all right spot, right? If I high roll, I'll be in a good spot. If I low roll, I'm probably playing for 4th at best. That's typically what this ends up being to me. I don't know your experiences, but it's a lot different depending on your elo. I'm in an elo where all my mistakes and all my greeting is getting super, super, super punished, right? If I'm not winning every round, that I have like an insanely strong spot, I can't greed to hope that I hit my cash outs later. I'll be dead before I hit the cash outs because everybody's going to optimize their board to such a way that I'm just going to lose the fights anyways, right? If you're in an elo where people aren't optimized as much, I don't know where that breaker point is. You might see that this comp is a lot more played or has a lot more success. And that's because if people live longer and people aren't like swelling up their boards and doing stuff in a super optimal way, then this comp could just steamroll later because you'll have enough time to reach those cash outs. For me, it's like a race against the clock, right? I look at my items. Those aren't Mbessa items, Rod tier. What am I supposed to do with those? Well, guess what? I need to tempo, right? If I'm committing to this, which I probably am at this point, I'm keeping the Darius, right? I didn't sell him early to just like play a different unit. So I'm playing around this Darius. I'm probably going to have to slam items on this Swain. It's either going to be Spark or it's going to be Archangels. Both are fine because eventually I can move them onto Mordekaiser if I really need to. Here I roll for something that makes my board a lot stronger. I hit Nox and Guillotine. So that's what I was talking about before. If I high roll, I'm in a good spot. If I low roll, I'm not. I high rolled, I'm in a good spot. This is going to be a top 1 or a top 2 now because of how strong Nox and Guillotine is. Trust me, it's very, very good. I have the spot for it. I have a Darius 3. I don't expect to lose a single round anymore. Darius is going to execute everybody's board. I'm going to win out on stage 3. I'm going to get maximum stacks. As you can see, my stacks are going through the roof. Stonks all the way up. I'm committing to this line for sure. So as you can see, I make my Swain on Archangels. Archangels is okay on Swain. It's not the best, but especially it's a lot better on backline Swain, I would say, because he does so much damage. But here, this was a little bit before I was kind of like a backline Swain believer. I have Swain in the front line just because I want to take some edge off of this Darius, so that, like, you know, I can make use of Swain being super tanky. Archangel scales his HP, so the Swain becomes really unkillable sometimes with Archangels. But it's a little bit more of a meme thing. It's more of a sometimes thing. It's because my items were so shit, right? That's the reason that I did that. If my items were really good, I would have made Spark, because I think Spark is probably better utility, because eventually it's good because of Mordekaiser. But I made Archangels because what else could I do? Here I'm going to roll. As you can see, What is this? A 4-1 roll down, right? If you remember my forecast guide, if you were here from my forecast guide, why am I rolling on 4-1? Because I might be contested. Also, I have a reason to roll. I'm protecting a win streak, right? My econ isn't as important as me continuing this win streak, because if I continue the win streak, it's worth more than the gold that I'm going to make from the interest that I would be making there. So I'm going to roll really early. I'm making sure that I find one copy of Invesa, right? Then I can put that in the board. If I find more copies of Investa, that's totally fine. But I basically want to strengthen my board as much as possible. The more that I strengthen this board, the better my chances are of converting this into a win. And I'm basically playing for first because I have Nox and Guillotine. Of course, I won't be able to fit in six Conqueror until I have a Mordekaiser. So most of this stage might end up just being me playing around these units, right? Playing around the board that I have here. Eventually, I'm just going to try my best. I made a QSS because I think it's probably good on somebody. I'm just trying to slam my items as aggressively as possible. So QSS to me, I have Last Whisper, which is fine. As you can see, the X's are all the executes. And I just play the Ambessa with the Form Swapper. This is my board for the time being. The augment that I took is Tomb Raider. I just didn't see a better option at the time. As you saw, I had to roll past 2 spats that were pretty much useless for me. So I took Tomb Raider because in my head I'm like, I'm 88 HP and I'm win streaking. Chances are 3 people are going to die and then I'll just get a bunch more items. Here, I end up hitting Ambessa 2, which is great. I get an extra component, which is great. I'm going to make red buff because I don't have anti-heal. I continue to slam my items. I'm skipping through this VOD because I don't want this to be a VOD review game. It's more so just me trying to quickly show you an example of a Conqueror spot that is pretty good and where the cash outs end up lining up roughly. So as you can see, I'm building up my cash outs. For my 5 costs and my 4 costs, I didn't really hit anything super incredible. But I just continue. Anomaly here. I'm deciding on maybe anomalying it, putting anomaly on the Darius. Because I'm probably going to hit Darius. I'm probably going to play towards Darius 4. It's probably correct to put on Ambessa as well. But here I'm just trying something out. I thought it would be more fun to put on the Darius. If you look at my board, Conqueror is very flexible. There's a lot of open spaces like for different units to put on the board. I'm playing 2 Dariuses because they both have a bunch of stats because of the Conqueror trait. So I'm totally down to just play 2 3-star Dariuses. That's what I'm doing here. I could play some other units, right? I could play a Quick Striker for Ambessa. I could play something else, but basically I'm just playing Sentinel. I have Form Swapper in, I have Watcher in, and I have 2 Dariuses because I'm assuming that they're going to be a little bit stronger than some of the other units. You have a lot of empty spaces. Sometimes with 4 Conqueror, if you're playing around solely Ambessa, you can also play Emissary with that because, 4 Emissary, 4 Conqueror, you can fit that in on level 7 and then find 1 extra unit for synergy, probably a frontline unit. But as you can see, I just went out, right? I'm playing tempo. At one point, my tempo is going to run out, right? At one point, you're going to notice I'm going to start losing a bunch of rounds. This Darius is only going to be good for so long until I reach that 330 cash out. That's why you have to have a really strong opener because even though you might end up at points in the game where you're really, really strong randomly, you'll see that I'm going to start losing every single round as soon as everybody starts hitting upgraded units and as soon as everybody catches up to the tempo that I had. So here, as you can see, I just make Ward Mogs for Swain. I'm trying my best. This guy's a Vi 2 and a Savika 2. He's Vertical Pit Fighter. I'm probably going to lose this fight because this guy has a Savika 2, right? Like I said before, at one point, people are going to catch up. People are going to start high rolling. People are going to start having good units. And then I'm going to start losing horribly every single round. And that's a lot of times what ends up happening. If you don't get to the 330 cash out, you start to bleed out really, really hard. And it just comes down to, do I live here long enough to make it into the top 4? Obviously, I have Anomaly on Darius, and I'm playing around Darius. But the other side of the factor is most of the other units on my board are trash, right? Unless I have a 5 cost in or a 6 Conqueror that gives me even more stats, or a Mordekaiser, eventually you start falling off a cliff. So as you can see, I'm losing these rounds. I was 88 HP. Now I'm 63 HP. Thank God I was really strong early because at least I'm going to be making my cash out for sure. Notice the round, it's stage 5. This has been a long game. This is like 30 minutes into the game. And then right here is where I'm going to hit my big cash out, I'm pretty sure. Oh, not now. It's not even now, by the way. Look, it's going to be like the end of stage 5, right? This was because I started the game off and I didn't have 4 Conqueror in a couple rounds, right? This is what I was trying to do with the math, right? If you're doubting my numbers with the math, this is what happens most of the time, right? If you're 4 Conqueror for most of the game and you don't start the game off with 4 Conqueror, look, it's gonna be stage 6 before I even get the cash out for 330, right? 330 is the one that you usually win out with. So as you can see here, this is where I get my cash out. It's right at the end of the stage. I'm gonna get a 2-star 5 cost, and also as you can see, I'm 1 turn off of Darius 4. So Darius 4 is gonna be a huge spike for me, and this 2-star 5 cost is also gonna be a huge spike for me. Holding on to some units on bench. I should just see what this 5 cost is so I can play around it a little bit better. But I think I'm just a little bit busy because I was playing offline. I got a Rumble. Here, see? I got a 2-star Rumble. So a 2-star Rumble, I can play for sure. And now I have a 2-star Rumble. If I had an emblem, like if I had a Conqueror crest that I can put on the Rumble, then that would be really, really strong, because then the Rumble would just get all the bonus stats for the rest of my team. Here I can put in 6 Conqueror, so now I get extra stats. As you can see, I'm getting 48% AD and 48% AP. And I also have Darius 4, which is really, really nice. So here we go. I'm putting a Rumble item on. Now I should be stronger than most people. Additionally, you can see that I rolled down all my gold. I also have a Jace 2, right? I have a Gwynsu that I put on the Jace, Shojin, red buff. Jace 2 is very, very strong, so he's just a better form swapper. And I also put in the Quick Striker now, because I was able to make it to level 9, so I can fit in my board really nicely. So I have Quick Striker for Mbessa. I have Jace 2, which benefits from form swapper as well. And like I said, if I had an emblem, then I can put it on. This is how usually your board wins out. The 5 costs are very strong this set. Conqueror allows you to play them very, very easily. Another board that allows you to play them is Emissary. That's another one that caps out very, very high. But because I have two 2-star 5 costs, I am in a very, very good spot to win. I'm holding on to this guy Zoe to make sure that he doesn't win. Long story short, we make it to the end of the game, and we end up winning the game based off of just being way stronger than everybody else and way ahead of everybody else. But so much of it starts from you having a very, very strong early game. If you looked at my early game, I had 4 Conqueror in pretty early. I also had a decent opener, and I had Worth the Wait. Hitting Nox and Guillotine is what made me go first. If I didn't hit Nox and Guillotine, chances are I would have bled out and ended up somewhere around the 5th area, right? This 50 HP, a lot of it was because I was getting so many executes with Nox and Guillotine. It is very, very important to have a good spot for it. If you don't have a good spot for the comp, it is very, very scary. Like I said, if you want to see a Giga High Roll game, you can also look at my video that I put in the description. It's also linked at the top of the video. But anyways, that concludes the guide.